meuman, nanach, nachma, sipurei masios. The second story of a king and an emperor. There was once an emperor who had no children. There was also a king who had no children. The emperor traveled about the earth, wandering around in search. Perhaps he would find some remedy or tonic that would enable him to have children. And similarly, the king also traveled, and the two of them happened to come and stay at the same inn, and they did not know from one another. The emperor recognized royal manners in the king, so he asked him, and the king admitted that he was a king. Nanach, nachma, meuman. The king also recognized royal manners in the emperor, and the emperor also admitted it to the king, each one. Each one told the other that the purpose of his travels was in order to have children. They agreed between them that if after they returned home, their wives gave birth, one to a boy and one to a girl, they would make a marriage match between them. The emperor returned home and fathered a daughter, and the king returned home and fathered a son. The agreement, however, was forgotten by both of them. The emperor sent his daughter to study, and the king also sent someone to study. The emperor sent his daughter to study, and the king also sent his daughter to study. It turned out that they were both sent to the same teacher, and they loved each other dearly. So they agreed between them to marry each other. The king's son took a ring and placed it on her hand, and they were married afterwards. The emperor sent for his daughter and brought her home. The king also sent for his son and brought him home. Matches were suggested for the emperor's daughter, and she was not interested in any match. And she was not interested in any match on account of the bond she had already made with the king's son. The king's son yearned for her greatly, and the emperor's daughter was also always sad. The emperor would walk her through his courtyards and palace, showing her greatness, and she was sad. The king's son yearned for her so much that he became ill, and no matter how much he was asked, "Why are you ill?" he did not want to say. So they asked his servants, "Maybe you can inquire by him." The servant told him that he knows the reason, since he was there at the place where the king's son was studying. He told him the matter. The king then remembered that he had already made a marriage agreement with the emperor a long time ago, so he went and wrote to the emperor to prepare himself for the wedding, since they had already made the agreement long ago. The emperor no longer wanted the match, but he was not able to be brazenly refused. So he replied that the king should send his son to him. And the emperor will see if the king's son is capable of ruling countries. Then the emperor will give him his daughter to him. Will give his daughter to him, the king's son, in marriage. The king sent his son to the emperor. The emperor sat him in a room and gave him government documents to see if he was capable of ruling the country. The king's son was deeply yearning to see the emperor's daughter, but it was not possible for him to see her. Once, while walking along a wall of myrrh, he saw her and fainted. She went over to him and roused him, and she told him that she does not want any other match on account of the bond between them. So he said to her, "What can we do? Your father does not want it." She said, "Nevertheless." Afterwards they took counsel and decided to go out on the ocean. So they rented a ship and set out on the ocean, and they traveled on the ocean. Afterwards they wanted to come to the shore, and they set ashore. There was a forest there, and they went there. The emperor's daughter took the ring and gave it to him, and he lay down to sleep. Afterwards the king's son saw that she was about to wake up, so he put the ring next to her. Afterwards they got up and went to the ship. Meanwhile she remembered that they had forgotten the ring there, so she sent him back to fetch the ring. He went there and was unable to find the spot, so he went somewhere else, and he could not find the ring. He went from place to place searching for it until he got lost and was unable to return. She went to look for him, and she too got lost. The king's son went further and further astray, and afterwards he saw a path, and he went to habitation. He had nothing to do, so he became a servant. She too went around lost, so she decided that she would stray. so that she would stay near the ocean. So she went to the seashore, and there were fruit trees there, and she settled there during the day. She went near the ocean, maybe she would find passerbys, and she survived from the fruit. At night she climbed up a tree to protect herself from wild beasts. Oh yeah, at night she climbed up. Oh yeah, at night she climbed up a tree. Hey, oh yeah, she climbed up a tree. At night she climbed up a tree to protect herself from wild beasts. The day came when there was an extremely great merchant who did business throughout the entire world. This merchant had an only son, and the merchant was old. Once the son told his father, being that you are already old, and I am still young, and your secretaries don't supervise me whatsoever. When you die, I will be left alone, without any knowledge what to do. So give me a ship with merchandise, so that I can set out overseas in order to be experienced in business. So that I can set out overseas in order to be experienced in business. So his father gave him a ship with merchandise. The son went to countries. He and sold the merchandise, purchased other merchandise, and was successful. While at sea, they saw those trees where the emperor's daughter was, and thought that it was a settlement. So the merchant's son wanted to go there. As they approached, they saw that they were only trees, so they wanted to return. Meanwhile, the merchant's son looked into the ocean and saw there a tree upon which was the appearance of a human being. He thought that perhaps he was having an illusion, so he told the other men who were with him. They too looked and saw the appearance of a human being on the tree, so they decided to draw near. They said, "Went a man with a small boat," and they looked into the ocean in order to guide the scout, so that he does not veer from the way, so that he goes directly to the tree. He went there and saw that sitting there was a human being, and he told them. The merchant's son went himself and saw her sitting there, and he told her to come down. She replied, that she does not want to enter the ship unless he promises that he will not touch her until they reach his home and marry her lawfully. He promised her, and she entered the ship with him. He saw that she could play musical instruments and speak several languages, which brought him joy that she had came about to him. Afterwards, as they began drawing near to his home, she told him that it would be only right for him to go home and inform his father, relatives, and all his acquaintances, so that they all come out to greet her, since he is bringing such a prestigious woman. After that she would reveal her identity to him, because previously she had stipulated with him that he should not ask her who she was until after the wedding, at which time he would know who she is. He agreed with her. She said to him, it is also only right, since you are bringing such a prestigious woman, that you inebriate all the sailors, so that they realize what kind of a woman their boss is marrying. He agreed with her. So he took excellent wine that he had on board the ship and gave it to them, and they got very drunk, and he went home to inform his father and relatives. So sailors got drunk, and they disembarked from the ship and collapsed, wallowing in their drunkenness, while they were preparing themselves to go with the entire family and greet her. She went and untied the ship from the shore, spread the sails, and set out with the ship. So the merchant's family came to where the ship had been, and found nothing. The merchant was enraged at his son, and the son cried out, "Believe me, I brought a ship filled with merchandise, etc., but they don't see anything." The merchant's son said to his father, "Ask the sailors." So he went to ask them, but they were lying there drunk. Afterwards they came around, and he asked them, but they knew nothing about what had happened to them. They only knew that they had brought a ship with merchandise, but they don't know where it is. The merchant was enraged with his son, and banished the son from his home, so that the son should never again appear before him. So he, the merchant's son, went away from him and wandered about. She, the emperor's daughter, sailed on the high seas. The day came when there was a king who built for himself a palace near the sea. Favored building a palace there on account of the sea air, and ships go there. Translators note it is not clear whether the ships going there is another reason, or if it is an aside thing. So the emperor's daughter was sailing on the sea, and she came close to the king's palace. The king looked and he saw a ship without a crew and with no one on board. He thought he was having an illusion. He ordered his men to have a look, and they too saw as he did. She came closer to the palace, closer to the palace. Afterwards she resolved, what does she need this palace for? So she started going back, but the king sent and brought her back and brought her to his home. Now this king did not have a wife because he could not choose anyone for himself, because whoever he wanted did not want him, and vice versa. When the emperor's daughter arrived there, she told him to swear to her that he would not touch her until he legally marries her, and he swore to her. She told him that it would be proper not to open her ship and not to touch it, just to let it stand as is on the water until the marriage. Then everyone would see the vast amount of merchandise she has brought, so that they should not say that he had taken a common woman. He promised her he would do this. The king wrote to all the countries to gather and come to his wedding. He built a palace for her, and she commanded that they bring her 11 daughters of nobility to keep her company. So the king commanded, and 11 daughters of very high-ranking nobles were sent to her, and a special palace was built for each of them. She also had her own special palace. These young noblewomen would gather with her, and they played musical instruments and games with her there. Once she told them that she would accompany them on the ocean, so they went with her and were playing there. She told them that she would honor them with good wine that she had. She gave them the wine that was on the ship. They became drunk, collapsed, and fell. She then went and untied the ship, spread out the sails, and fled with the ship. The king and his men took a look and saw that the ship was not there, and were panic-stricken. The king warned them not to tell her. The emperor's daughter suddenly, since she would be extremely distressed over the loss of such a valuable ship, because the king did not know that she herself had fled with the ship, and assumed that she was still in her room. Also she might suspect that the king had given the ship to someone. Rather they should send one of the young noblewomen to her and inform her wisely. So they went to the room of one of the young noblewomen, young noblewoman, and found no one there. The same happened when they went to another room, and to all of the 11 rooms they found no one. So they decided to send at night some elderly noblewoman to inform her. They went to her room and found no one. They became terrified. Now the fathers of these young noblewomen, who were accustomed to correspond with their daughters, saw that they were sending letters, but were not receiving any from their daughters. So these nobles went there themselves and found that their daughters were not there. They were enraged and wanted to send the king to his death, for they were royal ministers. However, they came to the decision, what crime did the king do, that he should be sent to his death, for it was a circumstance beyond his control. So they decided to dethrone him and send him into exile. They deposed him and exiled him, and he went on his way. The emperor's daughter, who had fled with 11 daughters of nobility, was traveling with the ship. Eventually the young noblewoman awoke and began to play music again as before, because they did not realize that the ship had left port. They said to her, "Let's go back." She answered them, "We'll stay here a bit longer." Afterwards a storm wind arose, and they said, "Let's go home." So she informed them that the ship had already left port. They asked her why she had done that, and she replied that she was afraid that the ship would be wrecked by the storm wind. Therefore she was forced to untie it and spread the sails. So they were sailing on the ocean and playing musical instruments. The time they came across a palace, the daughters of nobility said to her, "Let's go there." But she did not want. She said that she regretted having approached the previous palace of the king, who wanted to marry her. Some time later they saw some kind of island, and they went there. There were 12 thieves there, and the thieves wanted to kill them. So she asked, "Who is the greatest among you?" And they showed her. She said to him, "What do you do?" He told her that they were thieves. So he said to him, "We're also thieves. Just while you rob with your might, we rob with shrewdness, because we are skilled in languages and musical instruments. Therefore, what benefit would you have by killing us? Surely it is better that you take us for wives, and then you will also have our wealth." She showed them what was on the ship, and they agreed to her suggestion. The pirates showed them also all of their wealth, and took them to all of their places. They agreed not to marry all ever at the same time, but one after the other. But one after another. Also a selection should be made to give each one the noble woman that was befitting him according to his importance. Afterwards she told him that she would honor them with extremely good wine that she has on board the ship, wine which she does not partake, but keeps stored away until the day that God will bring her destined husband. She gave them the wine in 12 goblets and instructed that each of them should drink a toast to each of the 12. So they drank, got drunk, and collapsed. She told her retinue, people. She told her retinue, each of you go and slaughter your designated husband. They went and slaughtered them all. They found enormous wealth there, the likes of which cannot be found by any king. They decided not to take copper or silver, but only gold and precious stones. They cast out from the ship things which aren't so important, and loaded the ship with precious things, the gold and precious stones that they found there. They also came to the decision not to dress anymore like women, so they sewed men's clothing for themselves, German style, and they sailed with the ship. The day came, and there was an old king who had an only son, whom he married off, and transferred to him his kingdom. And the prince said that he would take a cruise on the ocean with his wife, so that she become accustomed to the sea air, lest, God forbid, they be at some time forced to flee to the sea. So he went with his wife with the royal ministry and set out on ship. They made very merry and played games. At some points, they said that they would all get undressed until they remained clad only in their shirts. They made a challenge, who can climb the mast, and the prince attempted to climb. Meanwhile, the emperor's daughter approached with her ship, and she saw the ship on which were the prince and the ministers. Initially she feared going there. When they got a bit closer, she saw that they were intensely occupied in a game. So she realized that they were not pirates, so they began to approach. The emperor's daughter bragged to her retinue, "I can knock that bald fellow," referring to the prince, who was climbing the mast and was bald, into the sea. For the prince was bald, he had no hair on his head. They said to her, "How is that possible? Behold, we are very far from them." So she told them that there is a glass that burns, and where ye eat this, you will knock him down. She told him that she would not knock him down till he had reached the very top of the mast, since as long as he was in the middle of the mast, were he to fall, he would fall into the ship, whereas when he reaches the top, then when he falls, he will fall into the sea. She waited until he reached the very top of the mast. She then took the glass that burns when held opposite the sun and focused it towards his brain until his brain was burnt and he fell into the ocean. When the men on board the prince's ship, saw that the prince had fallen, there was a great commotion. They didn't know what to do, for how could they return home? The king would die of heartbreak. So they decided to go to the ship that they saw, the ship of the emperor's daughter. Perhaps there was some doctor on board who could give them a solution. So they came to the ship of the emperor's daughter and the young noble woman, and noble women and the young noble women, and told them not to fear whatsoever, for they, the men of the king's ship, would not harm them at all. Would not harm them at all. The king's men asked them, "Maybe you have on board a doctor who can advise us?" And they told the whole story and how the prince had fallen into the sea. The emperor's daughter instructed to take him out of the sea. So they went and found him and took him out. So they went and found him and took him out. The emperor's daughter took his pulse in her hand and proclaimed that his brain had been burnt. They opened up his brain and found that as she had said, that's how it was, and they were stunned. Then they asked her to come with them to their home and be the king's doctor, where she would become very prestigious. She did not want this, and she said that she was not a doctor, but simply knows these things. The men on the prince's ship did not want to go home, so the two ships sailed together. The royal ministers thought it favorable for the queen to marry the doctor, since they saw how that he was very wise, because the ministers of the prince who had fallen and had died assumed that the emperor's daughter and the daughters of the nobility were men, and since they were dressed like men, therefore they wanted their queen, the wife of the dead prince, to marry this doctor, who was really the emperor's daughter, whom they mistook for a doctor, since she knew with her wisdom that the prince's brain had been burnt, and that he should be the king, while their own king, the old king, the old king, the father of the king, they would kill. However, they could not possibly suggest such a thing to the queen. Nanach, nachman, meuman. However, they could not possibly suggest such a thing to the queen, that she should marry a doctor. The queen also favored as well to marry the doctor, but she feared the country, lest they not desire him to be king. They came to the decision to make drinking parties, so that while drinking at a moment of merriment, they would be able to talk about it. They made a drinking party for each of them on a separate day. When the day of the drinking party of the doctor, that is the emperor's daughter, he arrived, he gave them of his aforementioned wine, and they got drunk. When they were married, the minister said how nice it would be if the queen would marry the doctor, and the doctor said it would be very nice, but only if they were saying this with a mouth not drunken. The queen also said how nice it would be to marry the doctor, if only the country would agree to it. The doctor, the emperor's daughter, repeated it would be very nice, but only if they were proposing this with a mouth not drunk. Afterwards, when they sobered up from their drunkenness, the ministers remembered what they had said and were embarrassed from the queen for having suggested such a thing. However, had not the queen herself also said it, she too was embarrassed before them. But hadn't they also said it? So they began to speak to each other about it and settled the matter among them. And she, the queen, married the doctor, who was really the emperor's daughter, whom they thought was a doctor, and they returned home to their country. When their countrymen saw them coming, they rejoiced greatly, since it had been a very long time since the prince had left. They didn't know what had happened to him, and the old king had already died before their return. Afterwards, the countrymen saw that the prince, their king, was not there. They asked, "Where is our king?" So they told them the whole story. So they told them the whole story, how the prince had already died, and how they had already taken a new king, whom they had brought with them. The countrymen were very happy that they had received a new king. Now the king, who was really the emperor's daughter, who had now become king, commanded to announce throughout each and every country that anyone, anywhere, foreigner, guest, refugee, or exiled, foreigner, guest, refugee, or exiled, should also come to his wedding, and not a single one should be absent. They will receive great gifts. Furthermore, he, the king, that is the emperor's daughter, commanded to make fountains all around the country, all around the city, so that anyone who wants to drink will not have to go away to get a drink, but will be able to find a fountain right near him. He, the king, that is the emperor's daughter, also instructed to have a picture of him drawn next to each and every fountain, and to station guards to watch for anyone coming along and looking intensely at the picture and making a sour face at someone who looks at something shocking or saddening. They should grab him and put him in prison. All this was done. These three men came along. That is the son of the first king in the story, who was the true groom of the emperor's daughter, who was now the king, the merchant's son, who had been banished by his father on account of the emperor's daughter fleeing with the ship and all its merchandise, and the deposed king also on account of her when she fled from him with the 11 daughters of nobility. Each of the three recognized that this was her picture. They looked at it, remembered, and became distraught. That is, they came to the fountains and saw the picture that was drawn there, and they recognized her. So they looked at it intensely. They were caught and placed in prison. At the time of the wedding, the king, that is the emperor's daughter, commanded to bring the captives before him. The three were brought, and she recognized them, but they did not recognize her, since she was dressed like a man. The emperor's daughter spoke up and said, "You to the king, you to the king, that is the exiled king who was one of the prisoners. You are a king. You were deposed on account of the 11 daughters of nobility who were lost. Here you have the daughters of nobility. Return to your country and your kingdom, because the 11 daughters of nobility were with her. You are a merchant." That is, first she spoke to the deposed king. Now she turned to speak to the merchant. That is, the merchant's son. You were banished by your father on account of your losing the ship with its merchandise. Here is your ship with all the merchandise, for the lengthy hold up of the money. You now have a much greater wealth on the ship, many fold more than there was before for the same ship, with all the merchandise belonging to the merchant's son, with which she had fled, was still with her in its entirety. And in addition to this was all the wealth which she had taken from the thieves, which was extraordinary wealth. for many fold more. And you, prince, who was her true groom, let us set out on our journey. And they returned home. Nanach, nachma, meuman. To number 3 of Alev's son. Of Alev's son, there once was a son. A sage who called his sons and family before his death and instructed them to water trees. You also have permission to engage in other occupations, but you must endeavor to water trees. After the sage passed away, and he left sons. He had one son who could not walk. He could stand, but he could not walk. So his brothers provided him sufficiently for his livelihood. They gave him so much that he had extra.